Morning, guys. My name is Brian, also known as Neuromantic or the Neuromancer here on YouTube. I'm a biology and chemistry teacher, a former medical student, and I run an addiction and recovery blog called the Concrete Confessional Blog. I have been on and off of benzos and opioids for going on 20 years at this point, and I'm currently tapering off of methadone maintenance, which is not a pleasant process, but I'm in the final sprint of that whole journey, and it is exciting, even though it is again an uncomfortable process. The idea that just a few more weeks I'm going to be completely free of this substance that has really been like chemical handcuffs is so incredible, So been tapering for almost a year now. It takes forever to get off this stuff, even if you're going at a quick pace. And yeah, I'm getting close to where it's going to be over. So thank you all for the support along the way. I'm making this video today. It's part two of my video series on Mark Laita and Soft White Underbelly. If you don't know what Soft White Underbelly is, it's a YouTube series with millions of subscribers. It's sort of developed and run by Mark Laita, who is a photographer who has a background in commercial photography for Apple, as well as other social justice project type photography, I guess you could say. And basically, it is a series of portraits and interviews with people on the fringes of society. So people like addicts and other mentally ill people, maybe people who have had certain trauma present in their lives early on, and who are talking about how it affected them later on. People who are sex workers or who are fetishists, or people who are nudists or live in different types of relationships compared to the standard two-person heterosexual monogamous relationship. So just there's all kinds of different people, and Mark interviews them to talk to them about who they are and how they came to be that way and what they want for their present and future, basically. So on its surface, it sounds like a project that could be fairly valuable, right? As I talked about in part one, there are huge issues with exploitation, with Mark taking on more sort of power in the lives of these extremely vulnerable people than he has any right to be wielding. There's a huge fundraising component to this project. Mark has GoFundMes that have raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. He alone decides how that money is dispersed, and he has used that power abusively in the past, as we saw again in part one when it came to the Whitakers and some other people who he's helped. So huge ethical concerns around this project. And my first video was about like the patterns of Mark not obtaining proper uncoerced consent from the people he's interviewing, many of whom are in the throes of active addiction or florid mental illness. It was about, in particular, an interview that he did with an underage girl named Nova who was being human trafficked. She was being sexually abused for money, sexually exploited for money. And Mark did an interview with her in which he encouraged her to wear skimpier clothing than she had on when she showed up for the interview, and to discuss in gory detail all these aspects of what was happening to her, in exchange for money. So that was disgusting, and I made a video talking about why these are just red flag after red flag after red flag with this guy's video. I talked about him being way too enmeshed, not having proper objectivity. I talked about him not consulting with properly licensed experts in the fields of mental health, and people who would be able to connect with and help his interviewees in a way that he himself is not qualified to do, but which he is nevertheless constantly inserting himself into the role of providing that help for. Okay, so today I want to talk about two specific cases. I want to talk about two young women who died after coming under the influence of Mark Laita. I want to talk about his 22-year-old girlfriend who passed away of an overdose recently. And I want to talk about Amanda Rabb, who died in a treatment center called Desert Hope in Nevada. Okay. I also want to talk about, in connection with that, I want to talk about Mark pushing and advertising either non-FDA approved and or sketchy medical, especially mental health treatment providers, and how he sort of creates this coercive or uncomfortable dynamic around informed consent for his interviewees. So I'm going to branch off of one of those two stories to talk about how he's doing that now with Rebecca and TMS. I'm also going to talk about, I've gotten behind the scenes receipts. Many people, multiple people have approached me since I made my first video, which went viral. I think I had like 100 subscribers before I made that video. That video got hundreds of thousands of views. And several people who have dealt with Mike personally stepped forward to give me some insight into what it's like to deal with him behind the scenes. And guys, if you want the TLDR, this guy is more arrogant, predatory, exploitative, and dangerous than even I would have believed at the time that I was totally infuriated making my first video. So if I had any doubt that maybe this guy was basically well-meaning but just really mucking it up, that doubt is gone. This guy is dangerous, and I have been talking to a group of professionals who are taking action in real life to see what we can do to make sure that Mark is brought up for proper accountability, to make sure that the people that he's harmed have access to recourse, and to hopefully prevent the Software Underbelly project from endangering other people. So without further ado, I'm going to get into talking about again about the recent death of Mark's girlfriend. Okay, so I think I should start there. So Mark is, according to the online estimates that I am able to find, about 65 years old. He is certainly over 60, which doesn't prevent him from walking around Skid Row shirtless. I've heard that from multiple people, so you got to you admire the chutzpah at least, right? But no, all joking aside, okay, so Mark met a young black woman named Kiara, who again was 22 years old. Now, Kiara had brought her mother, who was an addict, alcoholic, in for an interview for the Software Underbelly project. And this was about 2.5 years ago. Mark was really taken with Kiara, and they began dating. So just a few weeks ago, Mark went to the apartment that he was paying for Kiara, who also had addiction issues. He hadn't been able to get a hold of her for several hours, and he found her dead of an overdose there in the bathtub in the apartment that he was paying for. Now, Mark made a video discussing this experience, and he was really emotional in the video. It sounded like he was choking up, and I felt for him. I don't think that he's such a monster that he simply can't feel any human emotions. But this video, which was with another content creator who I'm not going to talk too much about, I had a bad vibe from it from the beginning to the end. It was very clear that Mark was trying to get out ahead of people who are going to be calling him out on the total, just abject inappropriateness of him dating someone that much younger than him, who is in active addiction, who has money problems, to support this girl financially after he meets her when she brings a vulnerable family member to him for an interview for his series. I mean, he knew. Guys, Mark knows that accountability is in the future. As arrogant as he is, and I'm going to again talk later on about how Mark talks to people behind the scenes, which again, to hear his messages eliminated any pity or remaining goodwill I would have had for this guy. Okay, but anyway, so he knows that people are going to see that he was dating Kiara. He can't keep that under wraps permanently now that she's dead, and he's trying to get out ahead of it. So he's being fed these discussion points by this woman who's interviewing him. And I just have some jotted notes that I took while I was listening to this video. Okay. He's saying it was a wonderful relationship, magical. I couldn't believe this was happening, and she couldn't either. When Mark starts using this very grandiose language, it's often, it's a sign I've noticed that he's feeling very defensive because he knows he's about to be criticized for something valid. So with the Whitakers, when he got mad at them because of something Betty Whitaker said, and he suddenly yanked all of the money that he had been giving him, that they now giving the family, that they now relied upon. When he did that, he made this video saying, "I'm done with the Whitakers." He was using the same kind of language. He was saying, I'm so good and generous, and their lives have improved so much since I came into them, and all I'm trying to do is help. Like, he has this very specific tone. It comes across so poorly. He has no insight into how poorly it comes across, and I got that same tone from this video that he made about Kiara's death. It's like these very puffed up adjectives. He goes over the top in justifying himself. So he keeps bringing up the point. He's like, I always told her, if you ever want to get rid of me because I'm too old, he said, if it's, it sounds weird on paper, but if you saw it, it wasn't weird. And he's, whoever this content creator is who he's talking to, he has this woman in his pocket. She's like, oh yeah, yeah, oh yeah. She's literally just like kissing him the whole way through. It's unbelievable. It was like he just found someone who wouldn't raise a single reasonable objective, who would make it sound like anyone raising any objectives was just a callous person who was clout chasing and who just wanted Mark to suffer, to exploit his suffering, right? So this whole thing was pathetic, and it had a really sketchy vibe around it. Mark is saying again and again, oh, there was nothing weird about it. Yeah, it sounds weird, but if you saw us in person, trust me, I didn't mention this for 2.5 years, really. Just, didn't think of it, but trust me, it wasn't weird at all. It's not like I was hiding it, and it's not like now I'm freaking out because she ended up dead, and there's another young woman who also recently ended up dead after coming under my influence. It's not like that at all. It's like, it's talk about, he doth protest too much. Okay, so you guys can watch the video. Maybe I'll link it in the description, but once you know a little bit about Mark, his psyche, how he operates, and how he speaks, kind of easy to see what's going on with this video, and it is sketchy. Okay, so he was the one who found her again, and I have been through what Mark has talking about going through. It is awful, but we need to look at the wider situation, and that he was engaged in an incredibly unethical, incredibly manipulative, and in terms of power dynamics, exploitative relationship with this young woman who, talk about enabling. Maybe if she hadn't had this rich older guy providing an apartment for her, maybe she would have been in treatment. None of us can say that's a problem when you deal with really vulnerable people, as all addicts are at such high risk of dying, especially in the era of fentanyl. We can't conclusively finger Mark and say she'd be alive if you hadn't done this. We can't say that for Amanda Rabb, and we can't say that for his girlfriend Kiara either. However, we can say that he helped to set her on a course that ended in her death, in that it is possible, if not likely, that if he hadn't been providing financial support, she would have felt a little bit more she would have had a fire under her butt to get better. Now, maybe that can sometimes push people into just accelerating their addiction, and even worse, but oftentimes it actually saves them. So the way I'm talking about this situation is informed by things that I have learned behind the scenes. Okay, if there is ever a part 3 to this video series, it will consist of the people who I've been speaking with who have dealt with Mark directly, either former interviewees or loved ones of those interviewees. Okay, in one case, I also have someone who briefly helped him with some of the social media stuff that he does, but primarily it's interviewees and their loved ones. Okay, so if I do a part 3, it will be them telling you this stuff directly. It's hard to get them to do that at this point, because even though, to his credit, one thing I can say about Mark is he doesn't seem so happy so far. However, again, there's stuff going on behind the scenes, and people who are trying to preserve their legal recourse, particularly in civil suits against Mark, they can't go public right now. Any good lawyer will tell you, do not talk about this on the internet. It can only hurt you in the legal process, civil or criminal. So those of us who are looking into this stuff, we need to protect them and make sure that they can get what they might be entitled to in terms of damages. So it's a little bit tricky. But again, if there's a part 3, I'm going to have some of these people, a couple of whom have said that they're willing to come on the channel and to discuss their experience directly. That's what this is going to consist of. Okay, but for now, let me just say I'm in conversation with someone who I'm going to mention later on in this video too. Okay, his name is Richard. He's been on a podcast discussing Mark and his experiences with Softwhite Underbelly project. And Richard has heard from someone who is allegedly a former sugar baby type girlfriend of Mark, who met him, who was to a certain degree supported by him financially, and when their relationship went south, felt badly enough about it that she allegedly had to leave LA and change her name and start over elsewhere. So one of the reasons that the relationship with Kiara and the way that it ended, that is bad on its face and all the way to the core, with no additional information provided. But it is a pattern of Mark using financial manipulation with younger, vulnerable women, and that ending catastrophically. We also know there was another interviewee who he paid for an apartment for. Now, we don't know whether he was sexually or romantically involved with this woman. We haven't heard that from either of them, but he did mention going to this apartment that he was paying for, letting himself in with the key that he had, and like looking around there because I guess she wasn't answering him, and he wanted to see what was going on. So there's a pattern here, and it is an extremely worrying pattern that, like everything that I discussed in video one, shows that this is not a guy who should have this amount of power over vulnerable people, period. Okay, so Mark's 22-year-old girlfriend, who he met through the Software Underbelly project, who's he financially subsidized, is dead. Okay, there was another young woman who, in the comments to my first video, was mentioned again and again and again. Okay, her name was Amanda Rabb, and she was mentioned so often because she was this beautiful soul. She had so many struggles, but there was this humor, this strength, and this like personality about her that came through so strongly. So people loved Amanda, and it was one of those video series like Rebecca that everybody was watching those videos. They were some of Mark's best, most viewed videos of all time. Okay, so when Mark met Amanda, she was on Skid Row. She was addicted to multiple substances, including alcohol and cocaine. She mentioned in her first interview with Mark that her father had sexually abused her. Okay, so how surprised am I when in the next interview with Amanda, we say, here's Amanda again, and here's Amanda's father. And Mark chimes in and says, oh, by the way, what Amanda said about her dad last time, don't think too much about that. That was total BS. Trust me. Now, how Mark could possibly know that what Amanda said in that interview was false, and that what she was saying, in the second interview and beyond about her father was right, is beyond me. He can't possibly know that. It certainly wasn't the case that Amanda seemed much better mentally in the second video and beyond compared to the first video. So sketchy to begin with, but the dad was involved in all the subsequent interactions and videos all the way through the video where they had Amanda's funeral and they went to the ocean to celebrate her life. They went to the beach to celebrate her life. Okay, so what's interesting is that, again, so the dad shows up, and in the series of videos, the dad and Mark mention that they are giving Amanda money, even though they know she's using it to get high, because they don't want her doing other things on Skid Row to get money. So I assume that means they don't want her selling herself for money. And I'm not going to blanket say that you should never give an active addict money. I don't think that it's usually the right thing to do, but sometimes it can be a kind of harm reduction or a kind of mercy. However, you should not tie that to, I'm making money off of this explosive video series about you. You have to keep telling your story, because then you're going to bring the attention in for me, and I can keep raising money and giving you this money. It becomes coercive when the person knows that they're not going to keep getting this money to support their habit in all likelihood, unless they keep talking to you, right? Unless they keep supporting your channel by providing content, right? So that's where it becomes clearly black instead of possible gray area, in my opinion. Okay, so it's typical shit show when Mark becomes involved. There's one video where he's forcing Amanda to go to a pharmacy. She's having psychotic symptoms, and supposedly he wants her to fill a script for an antipsychotic. Amanda doesn't like that, and she's like kicking and trying to threaten to jump out, trying to get out of his car. So again, the absolute arrogance of this man to think that he can basically. It's almost like a kind of kidnapping of a mentally ill woman to try to force her to take her medicine, and that he doesn't need any help managing what is clearly a situation that could go so badly, particularly since when people are having psychotic symptoms, like the most common kind of hallucination and delusion is people are poisoning you. People want you to take a substance that is actually going to hurt you, or maybe bring you under the influence of the government or something like that. So for him not to realize that him sort of impelling her to go get this medicine and take it could blow up in his face just shows what an ignoramus he is about this mental health stuff, and how arrogant it is of him to think that he had any business bringing someone as mentally ill as Amanda was at that point to get her medicine medicine and, doing that alone without making sure that there was mental health support, and assuming that that would even help her and that she would even take the medicine. Like, I assume he's hopefully not going to jam it down her throat. And again, typically when someone is that far along in their psychosis, they're thinking that the medicine is the enemy and they're not going to take it. So just one brief example of when Mark becomes involved, everything tends to just blow up. Okay, so I want to talk about what happened next with Amanda. And in order to do that, I have to briefly talk about Lima from Aura. Okay, BJ Investigates, whose material on Amanda is a phenomenal investigative series that I highly suggest you watch. She has a wonderful, really mean girl, but at the same time, like 10 points for a Gryffindor for accuracy impression of Lima from Aura. Her name is Lima Yevremovich, and the best expression, or the best way to characterize her, I read somebody hilarious said this on Reddit. They said Lima talks about this Aura technology like a middle schooler who's giving the presentation on a science project that she didn't do the work for and that she doesn't know anything about. So that is spot on. So this Aura company, or this Aura technology, was initially introduced on Software Underbelly by Lima as a data-driven mental health care solutions company. Specifically, in the beginning, they focused on this VR headset they had, this virtual reality headset that would put the person in triggering situations. Like for Amanda's virtual reality world, they created a virtual Skid Row. They put like vodka bottles and like crack pipes and stuff, So I guess the idea, which seems totally dubious to me, to put it lightly, is to trigger the person in a safe setting and then hopefully teach them how to like respond to it optimally, so that like then when they encounter the thing in real life, they will be better able to deal with it. I think that that is a recipe for anxiety and disaster. I think 99.9% of recovery is learning not to get to that point where it's in front of you, because once you're at that point, you're essentially already relapsed. You're reverting to pre-programmed looped behavior. So I think it's a totally stupid idea that could actually like lead to cravings. Now, Lima also mentioned that this non-FDA approved technology was being used on experimentally on veterans with PTSD and for a couple of other indications. So again, it seemed totally, from the first time I heard it, big eyebrow raise on my end, And again, I'm not a doctor. I studied physiology and medicine for 4 years of undergrad and 1 year of medical school before I took a leave of absence due to my addiction. So I'm not a fully licensed clinician, but from what I understand about this, which is, I can fairly say more than what the average person probably understands about it, dubious from the start. And other things about the fundraising that this company was doing, which involved a stage at which they weren't able to meet targeted deliverables. A lot of reason to believe that this was a sketchy company and that someone more perspicacious or someone with a higher standard than Mark would have picked up on that and not dealt with these people. But okay, so Lima from Aura shows up. And again, her company is supposedly, it's pioneering this VR headset to help addicts and other mentally ill people. They're also talking about this really Orwellian scheme where like they monitor your physiology. And if, say, your physiology shows you're anxious because maybe you're having a craving, they have this system where like they do an AI, say like breathing exercise on your using a wristwatch or your phone or something. If that doesn't calm you down, they put you on the phone with an actual clinician, which I guess would be the next logical step. The clinician thinks you're still at high risk. Now, this is where this gets truly creepy and Orwellian. Lima said, well, we bring you to a facility and we make sure you're safe until you're doing better. They asked her, one of the people interviewing her said, okay, when you say bring you a facility, is this voluntary? Are they free to leave? Nope, it's a gated facility is what Lima says. Not gated. It's not like a gated community, Lima. It's a locked psychiatric facility that you're being brought to, almost certainly in violation of your constitutional and healthcare rights, unless you're immediately a danger to yourself or others, which in many of the situations that she's discussing, like risk of relapse for addiction, you are not, to the extent that fulfills the very high criteria of the law for making that determination. Let's put it that way. You might be at risk of hurting yourself, but not with a clear intent to end yourself that the law requires under those circumstances, to like 5150 or Baker Act or whatever you want to do, wherever you are, whichever state you're in, whatever the legal instrument is to get you there against your will, okay? So anyway, that's what Aura is. Lima shows up, she takes a shine to Amanda, and they start treating Amanda with this non-FDA approved VR technology. technology. Now, Amanda is still having psychotic symptoms. She comes on and, again, BJ Investigates did a great video for this. She comes on Software Underbelly and she talks about how her treatment is going. It's up and down. She's relapsing and then trying to get it together, but she started saying this really weird stuff. And if you didn't know what was going on, if you didn't have the background, you'd just be like, oh, it's a schizophrenic person talking about their delusions. Because she's saying, I don't want someone right around my age in my head telling me my thoughts. She's talking about Lima because part of the design of the VR world was like, you know, revealing your triggering thoughts and your addict thoughts so that they can program it into this experience so that you get triggered by your own words and thinking, you know, so you can, again, I guess the theory is learn how to respond differently, but dubious. It's the last time I'm going to say it, beyond dubious even. Okay. So anyway, Amanda starts saying weird things and she says, they keep killing me and I keep coming back, and I see, like, she talks about like digital versions of herself all over Skid Row, you know? So it sounds like she's hallucinating and seeing herself everywhere, but what she's really doing is describing this VR treatment that they're giving her, and she seems to not be able to differentiate between what's coming from VR and what's coming from reality. And so in that sense, they've made her delusions, her paranoia, and her psychosis worse. They've made it way worse, okay? So this stuff is going on alarmingly, and Lima is talking, and this is a pattern. Mark is kind of saying like, wow, if this works for Amanda, look how bad she is. This could be the proof of concept. You know, this could make Aura, you know, a million or even $1 billion interest. So Lima eventually, what we think happened based on what she said is she takes out a loan to pay for Amanda's treatment. Now, Lima had been, apparently she had initially thought that Softboy Underbelly would use some of the raised funds to pay for that, you know? It didn't work out that way, and our understanding is that Lima took out a loan to pay for Amanda to go to this private rehab in Nevada outside of Las Vegas called Desert Hope. Now, that doesn't sound bad in and of itself, right? It sounds like she's helping her. But there are certain, just like when we talked in video 1 about consent, when we're talking about informed consent, which means in a healthcare setting, your right to make a free, fully knowledgeable choice when you're sound of mind for what treatment options you elect to pursue or not pursue. When we're talking about informed consent, again, there are many things that Mark does that impinge upon informed consent. Even like, you know, like sort of like pushing her in the direction of Lima and this non-FDA approved treatment, like that shouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have happened in the normal course of things. Amanda, I don't know if she had Medicaid. If she didn't have Medicaid, she certainly would have qualified for it in California. She should have gone to treatment there. She would have normally gone to treatment there. And, you know, she certainly wouldn't have gotten Aura, you know, if she had gone to treatment in your standard Medicaid reimbursed facility in California. And you know what, guys? That facility might have looked shabbier than Desert Hope. And Desert Hope itself, by the way, doesn't have any connection with this Aura technology, aside from that they apparently let Amanda be treated with it while she was there, okay? So this whole dynamic with Lima and Mark, it's like it sets up this, it's a perfect example of when Mark takes his interviewees, he kind of like puts them on the auction block as like, look how mentally ill these people are. If you're a healthcare provider out there and you're trying out, you're pioneering, you know, new technologies for mental health treatment, you know, think about if you could get one of these people, they can become your proof of concept. They can become your superstar marketing person. And in fact, Amanda did get off of the illegal drugs that she was taking. Her psychotic symptoms subsided to the extent that apparently they decided she was no longer schizophrenic, which is incredible. Unfortunately, they said goodnight to her one night. She was in her room at the final bed check for that day. They checked on her the next morning and she was dead. They thought she was sleeping in her bed. She was dead. Now, this is where things get even sketchier. Amanda had put on a lot of weight. People want to know what happened. Of course, her videos on Softboy Underbelly had gotten millions of views. People want to know what happened. So Mark has Lima on his channel to talk about Amanda's death. And Lima has this piece of paper with her. And she says she's reading directly from what I think she meant the coroner in the county that Amanda was being processed in, or maybe another doctor involved with her treatment when she was brought to the hospital and pronounced dead. She's saying she's reading exactly what they gave her. And she says Amanda had no drugs in her system at the time that she died. She didn't have anything. She said something to the effect of she didn't have anything stronger than Tylenol in her system. Now, BJ Investigates actually got the autopsy report. Amanda was clean of illegal drugs and alcohol when she died. But she didn't die of what Lima originally said she died of. She died of a cardiac, like, arrhythmia or conduction problem. She had many medications, including medications that work on that problem, on certain cardiac problems. She was taking gabapentin, which is a medication often used to reduce anxiety and sort of like that jittery feeling in recovering addicts. It is a medication that can be abused and a medication with recreational potential, but it's very common, again, for it to be used in treating recovering addicts. The reason I think it's interesting that she was on gabapentin is because it can alter the seizure threshold, and when you have a seizure, your heart rhythm can be disturbed. So I'm not saying that her being on that medication, is related to her cause of death. What the autopsy said was that it was probably caused secondary to some head trauma and other trauma that she had gotten during her active addiction, during her time on the streets when she was assaulted. So it wasn't a super clear autopsy finding because there are so many comorbidities. It sounded like the gained weight might have also played into the stress on her heart, but all we know is that Amanda's dead. And again, can we say that Amanda wouldn't be dead if she had ever met Mark? Certainly not. Certainly not. But can we say that at least at one point, Mark put her in a situation where her right to give her informed consent to medical treatment was compromised, where she was put in a setting where, again, her dad is looking on, Mark is telling her and Lima's telling her she can be a shining light to other people who are struggling with her problems. Like, she was put in a situation that I consider coercive. I think it's completely fair to call that situation coercive. No doctor would be comfortable with a patient who was pressured in that way. Amanda deserved to go to treatment without feeling financially beholden to the person paying for it, i.e. Lima. Amanda deserves to go to a treatment center that she, or at least a representative of her insurance company, decided was the best evidence-based treatment for her. Okay? Amanda deserved to be worrying about, just herself, about keeping herself alive and well before she worried about helping anybody else. And Lima even said that at the time Amanda was, again, she's been clean for a little while. She's in this Desert Hope recovery facility. Lima was talking about how while Amanda was going to school, presumably, I think, to become a substance abuse counselor, Lima was going to keep her on the payroll and she could start working as marketing for Aura, which was absolutely desperate. During this time, Lima was out giving pitch after pitch after pitch to secure in the next round of funding enough funds that Aura could scale up, that they could, sort of just like prove themselves. And that completely fell apart, by the way. And it fell apart for good reason, because this was not, from what I've heard, this was not a truly innovative, evidence-based, robust technique that could help a lot of people affordably. So Amanda deserved better than that. Can we say she would be alive if she hadn't met Mark? No. Can we say that Mark altered the course of her life and that she was put under pressure that she shouldn't have been put under? Absolutely. So for all of you who commented about Amanda after the first video, I'm there with you. I believe that something needs to come of her death. Mark is operating in this zone. It's new media, so he doesn't have to obey the legacy media ethical standards. He's had no training in being a journalist or an interviewer. He's not working for a nonprofit when, again, there would be ethical standards involved. There would be possibly licensing and accreditation involved. There would be some kind of accountability to the people donating to the project. He's in this new media free-for-all Wild West zone, and he's gotten away with so freaking much for so freaking long because of it. But the eyes are on him now. He's starting to make the kinds of mistakes that people make when they know that they're under scrutiny and they know that they've done wrong. And I know that there's going to be huge accountability for Mark, in the near future. I truly believe that. Again, I have access to some stuff behind the scenes that makes me optimistic, although it's a long road and there are significant barriers to be overcome. But yeah, Amanda met Mark. Mark sort of put her in a situation where she started getting non-FDA approved virtual reality treatment for her addiction, and she ended up dying. She ended up dead. So what can we sort of like say about this in the and the circumstances of her death were grossly represented. Either Mark knew that Lima was lying and let her lie, or he didn't do his due diligence and make sure that what she was reading was true before she read it to hundreds of thousands or millions of people on his channel. So in either case, in my opinion, Mark did abject wrong in dealing with her death. Why does that matter? Well, Mark is currently pushing Rebecca, who is an illegal immigrant. I believe she's from Egypt. She is trans, although Mark has repeatedly denied her transness. Mark has said to Rebecca, "Come on, you're not a woman," and he's just sort of mocked that she considers herself trans. But whatever your view is on that, Mark is now bringing up in his interviews with Rebecca, which he is making an absolute sideshow of Rebecca during. He's now bringing up again and again TMS. TMS is transcranial magnetic stimulation. Okay, now this is a technique. I had to look this up to see what happened since I was in school, but it is FDA approved for some indications, including treating major depressive disorder, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, migraine headaches, also maybe to help people quit smoking, can also be used as a treatment for depression with anxious distress or comorbid anxiety. Not clear to me where Rebecca would fit in there, because Rebecca is an addict who is often using uppers, including meth. Rebecca is having some psychotic symptoms because of that. We don't know if Rebecca has bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or another underlying disease, or if this is just the effects of all the drugs and lack of sleep. But it's not immediately clear to me how the FDA approved indications for TMS would fit with what Rebecca needs. But nonetheless, Mark keeps bringing up TMS, and in particular, he's telling Rebecca that he thinks Rebecca should get treatment through a husband-wife psychiatric couple. They're both psychiatrists. The woman's name is Carlene MacMillan, MD. The husband's name is Owen Muir, I think you say it, MD. Now, why am I bringing up these people? Well, because I think there's cause to be a little bit worried about them. Okay, so the Mal have the relationship, Owen Muir. He is being sued by a woman named Esther Haddad, who is the mother of a woman named Mona Haddad, who took her own life at the age of 26 while she was under the care of Dr. Muir. She's a mentally ill woman who, again, ended her own life while under this doctor's care. Now, the mother is suing. She has a blog, which I encourage you guys to look up. She makes really serious allegations about the way that this male psychiatrist is relating to, to underage female patients, and she makes allegations of serious wrongdoing. Now, do doctors sometimes get sued in the course of their career unfairly? Absolutely. But again, the pattern of people that Mark brings into the software underbelly web, most people who are working for strong institutions who have true expertise are not going to be willing to be involved in this kind of shit show. Mark doesn't have too many people who are truly at the top of the treatment game or whatever other sort of like institution that they're involved in. He doesn't have many people like that on his show for obvious reasons. Like, just watch video 1 and watch this video and you'll understand what respectable, accomplished person is going to want to associate themselves with that, right? But this husband-wife psychiatric team, again, has every chance of benefiting here. They could they could have a golden practice. If this technique works for Rebecca, or at least Rebecca says it does, they're going to have people knocking down their doors to use TMS, again, probably for a lot of indications that it's not even FDA approved for. They kind of sound like one-trick ponies, although I'm sure in their actual practice, they use this TMS as one of many tools, but this kind of seems to be their signature thing right now. And again, Rebecca deserves to choose individually, without too much outside influence, which doctors she's being seen by. She has a right to make that decision privately after weighing the information that's important to her. When Mark keeps bringing this up around Rebecca, it gets even sketchier, okay? Because Rebecca is saying things that it makes it seem like she thinks there's going to be some kind of financial reward. She asked Mark repeatedly about how much the treatment is going to cost and about like how much they're going to get for it. It seems to me, the language is ambiguous, but it seems to me that Rebecca might think that if she goes through this process, they're going to get some, meaning she and Software Underbelly are going to get some like kind of a kickback, for essentially being advertising. Can I say that for sure? No, that part is speculation. But what I can say is that Mark keeps bringing up TMS with these two doctors apropos of nothing when he's doing videos with Rebecca. And this is another situation where informed consent is being impinged upon. This is not proper. And it's sometimes hard for people who don't have healthcare backgrounds to understand exactly how important that is. But this should be, again, a pressure-free process where the patient can choose their own advocate if they want someone else to participate in the decision-making process with them. And this should not be occurring on camera. And this should not be occurring in the context of all these friggin' dollar signs flying around. Everything about this is alarming. Mark has a large base of subscribers and a fairly small base of rabid fans who attack anyone who raises any objections against him. The first time that I wrote an article about Softboy Underbelly on my blog and then raised my objections to what he was doing on the subreddit, devoted to Softboy Underbelly, that was the nastiest experience I've ever had on the internet. I got so dogpiled, it was unbelievable. People were telling me, oh, you're just jealous. Oh, you want him to have like, a board of directors that include lawyers and mental health professionals and interviewees who have turned their lives around to help decide where the money goes. Who's going to be, the leader of that board? You, which is ridiculous because I had said, that I have a full-time job. I have a career in another field. It's just it was unbelievable how nasty people got with it. And I'm not even going to go into the full set of things, but just he's got a really rabid fan base, and I just don't know how these people can hear what happened with Nova, with Amanda, with his girlfriend, and not stop supporting him. It is genuinely, that seems to me like it's verging on mental illness. If you are so attached to this daddy that you can't see that this is red flag galore and that people are being exploited and that he is profiting enormously in terms of fame and money from this trauma porn that he creates, I don't know what to tell you. I don't think it's a matter of logic at that point, because if it were, it would be settled by now. Okay, so I just want to talk about a couple other things. I'm conscious of, I don't want to not waste, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. I don't want to ramble, but there are a couple other things I want to mention before this video is over. If you'll stay with me, thank you. Okay, so again, I've had several people approach me who have personally dealt with Mark. Okay, one is my friend Richard. Now, he was on a podcast in which he talked about Mark. So I tried to get in touch with him before I made this video to see how much I could discuss, because I haven't heard back from him yet, which is normal. Sometimes it takes us a while to get back in touch with each other. I'm just saying a very limited overview of this situation without much detailed information, because I don't want to impinge upon his right to tell his own story rather. But if he approves me to tell more, I'll add to this and I'll put it in the description box below the video. I'll also link any content that he made that he would like you all to have access to. But basically, he has an ex-girlfriend who was interviewed as part of Softboy Underbelly. Now, Richard is also a photographer, and he got in touch with Mark. I read some of his communications, and the gist of the communication, what I got from it was basically he's getting in touch with Mark and trying to find out, are you a decent guy? Are you going to be, pretty protective of this girl who I loved and who I went to significant financial and emotional lengths to take care of, as well as the children that this interviewee had. Okay, and this interviewee was an addict, if I didn't say that already. I'm not going to give her name at this time, but yeah, she was an addict with, I believe, 2 children. And Mark was kind of, at first, not so bad in his response, but it got testy. So one thing that Richard asked Mark was to edit out the first and last names and potential street where the interview subject's children lived. Okay, so again, the interview subject had 2 young children. Richard offered to edit the video himself on his own time. He also gave Mark the specific time codes in the interview. Now, Mark had originally asked Richard, do you want her video taken down? And Richard said, it's not my decision, to make, but please take her kids' names out, because again, they're minors, they have a right to privacy. Now, Mark agreed to do this. Richard was checking. It was very clear that Mark had said he was going to do this, and Richard was checking for the updated, video to replace the original video. Long story short, it's been 2 years. Mark hasn't done a thing. Mark kept promising that he would replace the video the next day. The video's still up. Okay, so this is not an isolated instance with Richard. Okay, I've also been contacted by the long-term partner of an interviewee who is dead of overdose. Okay, and this woman contacted Mark and she asked him to take her dead loved one's, her partner's video down. She said she was not herself by the time, her partner did this interview, and she knew, having known her for almost 10 years before she died, she knew that in this woman's final 2 years of life, she was not herself. She would not want to be known the way her interview portrayed her. Please take it down. Mark he's had similar things to Richard once things got testy between them. So to Richard, the guy I was just talking about, Mark said, "You're just like everybody else, like I'm here ready to help this person. I've got money in hand. I've got a hotel room, and you're just, you're just out there criticizing me when you're not doing anything for them at all, So basically, you don't have any right to criticize anything I'm doing because I'm the one here to help this person." And this was particularly egregious in the case of Richard because Richard had gone to great lengths to help this woman, and again, even had spent quite a bit of his own money to do so. But in the case of this other woman, the surviving partner of a dead interviewee, Mark used very similar, even worse language. Like, he was so nasty and condescending. He said, "This isn't how this works." He said, "If you were so close with her, if she loved you so much, why weren't you there for her?" Basically, he said these people who come to his channel to do the software Underbelly videos, like, if they had someone else who loved them and supported them and protected them, they wouldn't be there. So I'm not taking this video down for you, on your say so that she wouldn't have wanted it up, and you have no right. Again, he's a megalomaniac. He tells her, "You have no right to criticize me for everything," and he used the same language. "You're just like everybody else." Okay, so when people say savior complex, this is like beyond that. This is like, again, kind of like a megalomania. I'm not doing the armchair cluster B diagnosis thing, but again, if you can't see the brightest of red flags in all of these patterns that are coming clear now that we're getting more and more information, I don't know what to tell you at this point. Like, I think it's not a matter of more logic or more data at this point. It's a matter of, are you being ruled by your emotions so that you won't let yourself see the truth? And I am not saying that Software Underbelly didn't do some incredible interviews that had real worth and that might have changed people's views of certain social issues in a positive way. Do I think most interviews were like that? No. Were a lot of them very exploitative and probably coercive in terms of the power dynamics? Yes, at least in my opinion. But yes, there was some value in it, but it's gotten more and more alarming. Mark's actions are getting more and more unhinged, and there is a clear vector here. And again, I'm making these videos in part to sort of like, there's this backlash coming, and we need it. There are people in real life contacting relevant institutions. There are lawyers being consulted, and it will help them greatly to see that videos like this have gotten huge engagement, have gotten tens or hundreds of thousands of views. This is what we need to make sure that, say, the law enforcement who might become involved in this know that they're going to be held accountable, that the eyes of the people are on them, and that this isn't something that they can just sweep under the rug that's happening in their area. So again, it's tough for me to talk in specifics right now, but there are things going on that I believe are going to bring Mark to some significant accountability. And does that mean him thrown in jail? No. But does that mean that he probably won't be able to continue on abusing vulnerable people in this way? Yes, I certainly hope it does. Does that mean that he might have some financial reparations to make to the people that he has abused and exploited? I certainly hope so, and I see positive indications in that sense. Okay, so again, I want to talk about Richard, and to the person whose name I'm not going to say right now, but she's the partner, long-term partner of a dead interviewee. The language that Mark used when he talked to them was totally supercilious. It was nasty without needing to be nasty, and it shocks me that he doesn't have, again, even if you are a douche to your very core, like, it shocks me that Mark was comfortable enough leaving that all in written and voice records. Like, he's a public persona at this point, a public figure, I should say. Like, the fact that he was so arrogant in those conversations that he thought it would never get back to him, that he's so big, maybe people wouldn't believe them, or that these people wouldn't dare to speak out against him. It speaks volumes about what kind of person he is at his core, and about how detached he has gotten from the reality of how he comes across versus the reality of how he sees himself. So finally, I want to touch on one more thing, which is an interview that Holly Randall did for her podcast, which is called Holly Randall Unfiltered, in which she has interviews with sex workers of various stripes. Charlotte Sins, who's an adult performer who went on Softway Underbelly, said that it was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of her career. Think about that. This is a woman who does some very intimate things on camera for money. So for her to say that something was very uncomfortable and that she felt sort of like exposed, it says a lot, guys. And what she said was that Mark told her he'd already had enough adult performers, enough corn performers. So, he asked her, well, could you just talk about when you used to be a webcam girl? Don't worry about the porn stuff. We'll act like that doesn't happen, So this is one example, which we have several other examples of Mark basically telling people to lie. I also have an example. I was contacted by someone who was interviewed, and Mark used their interview after the fact. He attached tags like mental illness when this person has no formal mental illness, and this person felt like they were represented as kind of like a wacko, when that certainly wasn't their understanding going in about how the interview was going to be conducted and how it was going to be advertised. So anyway, there is a lot, but Charlotte Sins has given us more proof that it's a very uncomfortable thing. Mark wanted to hear about trauma. She made that very clear. She also knows someone else, another colleague in her industry, who had a really uncomfortable interview, who asked for Mark to take it down, and who Mark refused that offer for. So we know, again, that he tells people that they can take their video down, and that in several instances at least, he's refused to do that after the fact. So there is more and more and more. And because I'm trying to stick to the main points and the patterns, I'm going to end it here for today. So thank you all for listening. If you are supportive of this effort to make sure that Mark Laita doesn't have indefinite, unsupervised access to vulnerable people, please like this. Please consider subscribing. Please leave a comment. Please, if you're involved in any other social media platforms and you can raise these issues there, please do. Let's all make sure that when people search Mark's name, that they know not just the sort of PR version of what he does, but also all of the shady stuff that is constantly swirling around him. Let's make sure, again, that people who are supposed to be guarding the rights of the vulnerable people who he's interacting with know that there are going to be hundreds of thousands of eyes on them when it comes time to make sure that Mark Laita is held accountable for these sketchy and scummy things that he's doing. So thank you all for listening, and I will keep you updated.